As we come to the end of our series on church politics, we've been talking about politics as getting things done together and looking at various principles for how we do that. Whether you're trying to get things done on the school board or in a school room, in the church kitchen or in your kitchen, in a boardroom, a stateroom, a conference room, wherever it is that God puts you. But as we close the book on this series, we need to acknowledge that we are blessed to live in a country in which one of the big ways that we get things done together is through what most people think of when they hear the word politics, our governmental systems and elected officials. Last week, Krishan asked and answered what it should look like for us as Christians when we are forced by conscience or conviction to practice civil disobedience in regards to the commands of a government. This week, we're going to kind of zoom out from there and try to look at the bigger picture of how we as Christians should relate to the government in general. We're going to look through a lens that Jesus gives us through a memorable phrase. And through that lens, we're going to hopefully see how the practices and principles that we've talked about these last 7 weeks can shape how we as Christians engage in the electoral process, how we should work to get things done together on the scale of elections and government systems and structures. So let's go ahead and dive into Matthew 22. We're going to start at verse 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words, Jesus. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then, what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said, "Caesar's." And then he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. It's one of those quick sayings that stands out from the Bible that has entered even into the public vernacular. Let's give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. It's probably one of the principles most at the core of how we as Christians are supposed to engage with the government in whatever country we live in. But it's also perhaps one of the phrases in the Bible that's used the most without thinking about what it's really saying. So this morning, we're really going to try to tackle what this phrase is and isn't telling us as Christians. And the first thing we see is that the phrase shows us that there are two very obvious ways to mess up the balance that Jesus is calling us to. If he's calling us to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's, there are two ways to fall off that path that Jesus is giving us. The first one is a temptation to give to Caesar what is God's. I'll say again, to give to Caesar what is God's. In a country that worked so hard in our founding to avoid the creation of a state religion for fear of oppression and division that would be caused by that, I think we've seen a functional state religion rising up in recent years. Around the time of our last presidential election, I saw someone post on social media. They said, "I want to thank," insert name of politician here, "for helping me to finally believe in something." I don't say the name of the politician because it doesn't matter. It was the general idea of, I thank this politician for finally helping me to believe in something in life. Friends, I think our modern age's state religion is called politics. It's looking at politics and saying, this is the thing that will fix everything in life. The British theologian N.T. Wright has noticed a trend in Great Britain towards an unhealthy level of obsession with politics, perhaps mirroring our own. And he said, politics will stop being our demon when politicians stop being our gods. And like any false god, when politics is elevated out of its good and right role, remember we've got 7 weeks now of talking about the good and right role of Christians in politics, but when it's elevated out of its right role, like any other idol, it will try to steal away attention and devotion from God's children. Psalm 20 verse 7 says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." One of the great temptations of our day is to trust in chariots and horses. Those were symbols of governmental and military might. It's the power of the world that will keep me safe, that will fix everything. To trust in those rather than putting our full trust in the Lord. So this morning, I think it's important for us as Christians to regularly check ourselves, test ourselves, make sure that we're following Christ to the best of our ability. So we're going to look at 4 diagnostic questions to think about, am I being tempted to give to Caesar what is God's? So our first question, has my engagement with politics become about the fight and the enemy, not about the people whom I want to see protected, benefited, and uplifted through the political process? A few years ago in the Marvel TV show, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it was a really bad show. Don't go and watch it. But I watched it because I'm a nerd, so you get an illustration out of it, so you at least get that. There was your hero, and then there was your kind of bad guy. But the bad guy was set up as this freedom fighter. She had begun very a Robin Hood setup, kind of taking from this group who was hoarding resources to feed the starving poor and this, that, and the other. Except that freedom fighter had recently gained superpowers and began using more and more violent methods to get what they needed. The hero found himself trying to convince this young woman that her rage and anger at real injustice and oppression was beginning to change her into the thing that she said she was fighting against. Someone willing to use power and violence and do whatever they needed to, regardless of the needs of others, to get what she wanted. Have you I think when we are about the fight, when we engage in politics in an idolatrous way, that it becomes about the fight in a way that takes our eyes off of the goal of the conflict and makes it about the conflict. Have you felt or seen maybe something like this happening in recent years in national politics? Maybe someone comes into it fighting against something, but slowly they start adopting the tactics and even the morality of that thing they said they were fighting against. In The Lord of the Rings, there's a character named Faramir. And Faramir is a noble warrior who is seeking to protect his people from an encroaching darkness. But at one point he says, "War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend." It's actually my favorite Memorial Day quote as well. Friends, our politics has to be about that which it defends, about the people behind the policies, the people that we are trying to love and care for and help, even those the world sees as our enemies. And so that's point number 2. Do I dehumanize and devalue the image of God in my political opponents, or refuse to show charity or humility in my engagements with them? That's diagnostic question number 2, to see if politics is taking the wrong role in our lives. This is really just kind of a reframing of the question, have I stopped listening to Jesus' commands from Matthew 5:44? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. We need only look at how people talk about each other these days in politics to know that this is a huge temptation in our current political moment. GOP Senator J.D. Vance, when asked during his run for office why he was a Republican, answered, "I think our people hate the right people." Hillary Clinton famously said that she thought of folks who voted for Trump as deplorables. I had an acquaintance a few years back who posted on social media about how they were joining a new church. Just hours after they had posted on commenting that those on the other side from them politically were democrats and libtards. There's no safe political side here. There's no party that's totally immune from this. Because this isn't a party issue, it's a heart issue. It's an idolatry issue. Because anything that we make an idol in our lives will at some point demand some form of human sacrifice. And in this case, the political idol says you have to sacrifice the regard in your heart with which you should hold those other human beings as individuals made in the image of God and infinitely valuable, whether they're on your side or not politically. Our third diagnostic question, to make sure we're not falling into political idolatry: has the way I think about politics become primarily colored by fear? Proverbs 29:25 says, "The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe." We talked about in a previous message that there's plenty of folks out there who are excited to lay a snare for you. There are plenty of folks out there who like to try to make people afraid and benefit off of it. It's not a new thing. Bill Watterson was writing about it 3 decades ago in the format of brilliant newspaper cartoons, such as this one. Calvin says, "I'm writing a fundraising letter. The secret to getting donations is to depict everyone who disagrees with you as the enemy. Then you explain how they're systematically working to destroy everything you hold dear. It's a war of values. Rational discussion is hopeless. Compromise is unthinkable. Our only hope is well-funded antagonism. So we need your money to keep up the fight." Hobbes says, "How cynically unconstructive." And Calvin says, "Hey, enmity sells." There's always somebody out there who's excited about making you afraid, whether there's something to be afraid of or not. But we also have to know that this is just how our hearts work naturally as well. Tim Keller wrote a book called Counterfeit Gods about all the different modern idols that we tend to run, that we see people struggling with or running after these days. And he said one of the signs that an object is functioning as an idol is that fear becomes one of the chief characteristics of life. When we center our lives on an idol, we become dependent on it. If our counterfeit God is threatened in any way, our response is complete panic. So we don't say, "What a shame, how difficult, that'll be hard, that's too bad." But rather, "This is the end, there is no hope, flee for your lives." Keller continues, this may be a reason why so many people now respond to U.S. political trends in such an extreme way. When either party wins an election, a certain percentage of the other side talk about leaving the country. They become agitated and fearful for the future. We have put the kind of hope in our political leaders and policies that was once reserved for God and for the work of the gospel and of the church. When political leaders are out of power, we experience a death. We believe that if our policies and people are not in power, everything falls apart. I want to make sure we're not just focusing on the negative as we go through here. So I want to maybe reframe this diagnostic question before we move on in a positive way. Here's a positive question to be asking. Is my hope and faith in the goodness of God evident in the way that I engage with politics? Is it clear that I have hope in the Lord regardless of what happens? Final diagnostic question before we move on to the other side of this equation. Is truth optional when it comes to my politics? I loved one of my favorite experiences in life so far. Me and Thea and Caden read through the Chronicles of Narnia probably 3 years ago now, and just remembering their responses to those stories. But in Prince Caspian, there's a moment where the Narnians, the good guys, are being attacked by this oppressive army, the Telmarines. And they don't know how they're going to survive. They don't know if they're going to survive. They don't know if help is on the way. And one of the characters, the dwarf Nickabrick, begins advocating for a kind of utilitarian warfare, a total war, the ends justify the means scenario. And at one point, Nickabrick says, "I'll believe in anything or anyone that'll batter these cursed Telmarine barbarians to pieces." I'll believe in anyone or anything that accomplishes the purpose that I desire. When we move into a politics as idol mode of being, the truth often becomes to us an unavoidable sacrifice on the altar of that idol. Michael Ware saw this clearly. He was a Capitol Hill staffer for a number of years, and he wrote about this trend that he often saw during his time working at the White House. He said, as Christians, we should be members of a political party because we believe things. We should not believe things because we are members of a political party. He was saying the truth should own us, not any organization. So those are our 4 warning signs that we might be giving to Caesar what is God's. But Jesus' statement implies that there's an opposite temptation that might also become a problem. This one doesn't get talked about as much because I just don't think it shows up as much in our society these days, but it's important to confront it nonetheless. And that is, we might be tempted to give to God what is Caesar's. Now, this is an extremely important don't hear what I'm not saying moment this morning. Nobody gets to report me to Presbytery for heresy. God, ultimately, everything is God's. Everything belongs to Him. As the Reformed theologian Abraham Kuyper famously said, there is not 1 square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine. Amen, absolutely. So if that's true, what might it look like if we violated Jesus' command and withheld from Caesar what is Caesar's? As I thought about it this week, and I really tried to zoom out more into the general biblical teaching on our job as Christians, the phrase I kept coming back to here was political apathy. The undertaking of hyper-spiritualizing the world to the point where we can say to ourselves, since God is in control, I don't have to put any work to contribute in this area of my life, to engage in this case, the political processes of whatever nation I am a part of. But that feeling, that sentiment, it just doesn't fly with the Bible. Because yes, the Bible says if you are a Christian, this world is not your ultimate home. The passage that Chris read before the service, Philippians 3, says your citizenship is ultimately in God's eternal kingdom. Absolutely. But it is also true that you have been called as a missionary and a representative of Jesus to the place where you live today, even though it is not your heart's ultimate home. Jeremiah 29:7 was written to believers who were in exile. They had been captured by another nation and dragged away, and yet it still says, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So if we are, as Christians, seeking the welfare of the city, in this case the place, the city, the state, the nation, the country, whatever that we live in, we have to acknowledge that the city, the nation, the place where we are living today decides things with votes. And so that's a part of what we have as Christians to do our job. Daniel Darling is a Baptist pastor and writer. He was part of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission that worked in D.C. He once wrote, loving your country too much is bad eschatology. So he's saying political idolatry, being trapped to something here on earth, that's bad eschatology. It's not realizing this isn't my ultimate home. I'm looking forward to eternity. But he also said, not loving your country at all is bad missiology. Missiology is the mission that God has given us, studying what has God called us to do as Christians. He was saying it's bad missiology because it's not giving God credit for putting you where you are, when He wants you to be, where He wants you to be at this point in time. It's not taking seriously the mission that He has given you to this place and this time and these people with whom you are living in community. I want to do a quick note of definition here before we move on about political apathy. I'm not talking about, I hate all of these options, this is tough, I would like better options, please, when it comes to politicians or policies. There's probably a lot of folks who fall in that. I'm talking about, I don't care, God will work it out, whatever. Total disengagement to the point of abdicating any responsibility that we have. That's what we're talking about. And I think that kind of apathy gives us some clear warning signs that we are violating some of the principles that we've talked about the last few weeks. So I've got 2 diagnostic questions here. First, do I advocate for the value of the image of God in the people around me? Am I advocating for the value of other people? One of the many resources that you have to do so is a vote. It's part of your voice in a political process. Now note, that's one of the resources we have to advocate for the value of other people. Voting and then saying, that's it, I did it for my neighbors, all of you, I hope you're grateful, mission accomplished. That's like sticking duct tape on a big leak in the bottom of your boat and saying, there we go, it's done, taken care of, no more problems forever, good job. It's one thing, voting, engaging in the political process, it's one way, but it is a way, and even more so maybe staying engaged in political processes, how we do life together at the local and state levels, things like school board meetings or PTOs or neighborhood watches or community organizations. Those are ways that we show that we value the people around us who have been created in the image of God and that we want the best for them. So that's our first diagnostic question. Our second one, do I feel isolated from everyone around me? You can swap in whatever word there. Isolated, alienated, separated from the people around me. I think political apathy can be a betrayal of the Christian principle of mutuality and multiplicity that Krishan preached on a few weeks ago. You might remember he talked about Jethro coming to Moses, and Moses is trying to run basically this entire multi-million person nation of Israel all by himself, and Jethro says, why are you trying to do this alone? If I am totally unengaged from all the political processes going on around me, yes, governmental, state, national, local, etc., but also things like local organizations, church governance, if I'm totally disengaged from all of that, it's very likely that I'm believing one of 2 lies. Either I don't need them and I'll be fine on my own, or they don't need me and I can't help. If we're isolating ourselves from the people around us, we're probably believing one of those lies. Important proviso here, no one can do everything. You're not going to be engaged in every single one of these areas at an extremely intense level necessarily. Faithful political engagement for one person might look like driving myself insane with busyness for another. But within that understanding, the Bible does over and over point to the principle of our dependency on each other, on how we are created for community. Think about Paul's body analogy, that we as the church, we're like a body and we can't function without each other. So, if we dump that principle entirely by pulling into a total political apathy, that is what I'm going to call this morning giving to God what is Caesar's. Because I am forfeiting a responsibility that God had given me and trying to dump it back onto Him. And here's the thing. There are plenty of folks out there these days who will tell you if you do that, God's plan will fail. No, God will be fine. He's God. He will still be in control. He will still be sovereign. But in refusing to use all the resources He's given me for the good of the people around me, I am doing what the failed servant in Jesus' parable did. Maybe you remember the story. There are 3 servants who are given different amounts of money to take care of while the master's out of town. And the first 2 go and they do their best and they do work and they try to multiply it and do what they can with the gift they've been given. And the third, out of some combination of laziness and fear, hides his money. He buries it in the mud. And so he's the one who misses out on the reward. When we refuse to use the gifts God has given us, including the gift of living in a country where I have some small voice in what is done and how things are run, when we bury those gifts, God will be just fine. He will still be working things together for His glory and the good of those who trust in Him. But I am robbing myself of the opportunity to be a part of His amazing work in bringing goodness to bear on the community around me as best I am able. So those are our two cliffs, our two no, don't do that of Jesus' statement. Political idolatry, political apathy. Let's turn towards the positive side as we close out. What does it look like to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's? I'm going to tip my hand here. My philosophy in life and ministry is very much that if God has the right place, everything else is going to be where it's supposed to be. That I have to have that one thing first, and then I can work on making sure all of the other things line up to it. So we're going to start by looking at giving to God what is God's, making God the hallmark of our lives, and in this particular context, seeing Him as the center of our political ideas, our political longings, our political hopes and dreams. Probably my favorite modern musician is Andrew Peterson. Peterson wrote a Christmas album decades ago now that was themed around the idea of looking at Christmas through the lens of the whole rest of the Bible. So it kind of pulled in all these threads from the Old Testament and from looking forward to eternity and things, and talked about what does Christmas mean when we look at it in this context. And he has this song called So Long Moses. It's huge. It's like an 8-minute song, and it tracks Israel all the way from Moses up to Jesus' time and the way that they were looking for a king. He tracks their search for the right king, for the true king, for the perfect king. It's a quest that I think in a lot of ways our human hearts are still on today. And at one point in the song, the people of Israel take up this old refrain. They say, "So speak, Isaiah, prophet of Judah. Can you tell of the one, this king who's going to come? Will he be a king on a throne full of power with a sword in his fist? Prophet, tell us, will there be another king like this? Full of wisdom, full of strength, the hearts of the people are his. Prophet, tell us, will there be another king like this?" I think we have a natural longing in our hearts for a true king, for the kind of king described here, full of wisdom, full of strength, the hearts of the people are his. We want that, and it's good that we want that. But when we don't find it in the right place, it's why our hearts are so prone to political idolatry, to trying to find a source of hope, a fix to our problems in someone out there. Because I think we know deep down inside that we can't fix this by ourselves, that we aren't powerful enough, and that even if we were, there's some ways in which we're part of the problem. We need a hope that is out there, something that is superhuman to save us. And I think while this is what leads us into political idolatry, it's also why when we fail to find those figures in our politics out there, maybe sometimes we fall into political apathy. We say, I'm never going to find this. How could I find it? And this is where I want to offer a perhaps a bit controversial word of hope for us as the church in America today. Because I think when we lack political leaders who even marginally resemble this king, when so many of us are left looking around at our politicians at various levels and saying, is this the best we can do? By politicians on either side of the aisle, maybe, just maybe, that can actually be helpful for us to stop trying to look for our king in the wrong place. Maybe the tragedy isn't that so many Christians and people in general feel politically homeless these days, but that we were tempted to build a home in that place in the first place. Maybe our current political struggles and fighting and ugliness can help us to look for our king in the only place we can actually find him. Because I really believe that the only way we have an appropriate relationship with Caesar, the only way we as Christians have an appropriate relationship with government, is to remember that we're only going to find our king in one place. We're only going to find our king in giving to God what is God's. that our only leader is the Lord, our true loyalty is to our King, our home is in eternity with Him, that our people are the church, and that we have been given a mission to take the good news to everyone who hasn't heard or accepted it. And if we believe that, if we really put God in His right place, if we give to God what is God's in our lives, then I think our approach to Caesar, to politics, is going to be totally different from that of anybody else on earth. Because our King, our ruler, our Lord didn't come with pomp and bluster and arrogance. He didn't come trying to get rich or famous. He didn't seek lordship as a way to be, as a means to be able to look down on everybody around him or build himself up. He wasn't looking for power. He was giving it up. As Isaiah reminds us again in Peterson's artistic rendering of Isaiah 53, He'll bear no beauty or glory, rejected, despised. A man of such sorrow will cover our eyes. He'll take up our sickness and carry our tears. For His people He will be pierced. He'll be crushed for our evils, our punishment feel. And by His wounds we will be healed. We will be healed. Friends, as our hearts are looking for a true leader, a true king, especially in this coming election season, may we look in the right place. May we avoid political idolatry, yet still take action on behalf of others, avoiding political apathy. And may we find a way to accomplish this, to walk on this knife's edge by preaching to our hearts every day that the only place they can find their true leader, the Savior that they need, is on the cross. The leader who gave His life for ours and by whose wounds we can be healed.